All right. Well, good afternoon, folks. Appreciate you joining us today. Got a couple gentlemen with us from Fifth Wall Solutions. I'd like to go ahead and introduce them before we get started. First, Andy Runyon is the partner risk advisor for Fifth Wall Solutions. Andy specializes in tech E&O coverage and works alongside Fifth Wall's partners to help them understand their risk as well as the risk of their clients. Andy's been working in cyber insurance since about 2019. Came over to Fifth Wall 2023, and a little bit about him. He lives in Arkansas with his wife Sarah of 18 years and their three kids. And when he's not traveling for conferences or helping MSPs out, he's enjoying watching and coaching baseball and hanging out with his dog Dansby. So Andy, appreciate you joining us today.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.
Man, that was
Awesome.
way more than two sentences, Andy.
Sure was. And
Classic
Will,
Andy.
Typical Southerner response, right?
and Will is the channel chief at Fifth Wall Solutions, and he's built his career bridging gaps between cyber insurance and cybersecurity through media content, speaking engagements, and general education. So thank you for joining us as well, Will. Great to
Yeah,
have
happy
you.
to be here.
So I wanted the folks to know this is a unique kind of partnership and why I wanted to have this particular webinar. Folks may or may not know I traveled to a lot of conferences over the years, been part of a lot of peer groups, speaking engagements, etc. And in the world of cybersecurity and cyber insurance in particular, seems like the community kind of takes one tactic, which is always scare the crap out of our customers that, hey, you're going to get hit, so you need our services. And then when you do get hit, it's going to cost you a ton of money, so you better have something kind of in reserve. And then where does cyber insurance come in? And in full transparency, Andy was asked to be a speaker at a lunch and learn that a peer group that I was in, I don't know, 6 months ago, something like that. And Andy came in and gave what I call a unique presentation. It was different from everybody else's. And I think it really highlighted the importance of working not only with a cyber insurance company and getting coverage, but working with trusted professionals that know how to put you in contact with the right people, review your contracts, point out where things are going to go awry when it's time for you to file a claim, give you good tips and tricks, ways to save money, etc. And Andy did all of those things in our presentation. So since then, I've done multiple kind of sessions with Andy and Will, and I thought everybody who's listening would really benefit from having you all here. So thank you again for being here. And basically going to be a pretty simple format. I've got some questions I'd like to ask you that are really pertinent to our user base and our clients. And then, feel free to add color, and I'll add some context and color as well from things I'm seeing, things I'm hearing from our clients. So first and foremost, let me kick it off and start with you, Andy.
Yes, sir.
I kind of already mentioned the fact that fear is a sales tactic,
Right.
and it only works so far, right, and for so long. And
Right.
I was hoping you could tell people kind of like what you explained to us that,
Right.
there's the ransom piece, which is, yeah, you should be a little bit scared you're going to have to pay the ransom, but the ransom's only one component of that. There's a lot of other things that are going to take place if they're actually
Right.
attacked, and as they interact with their insurance provider, assuming they have one. Um,
Right.
Maybe you can kind of tell them like some of the other areas that there's going to be costs involved and where providers will help out and not help out. Anything to kind of start that off would be fantastic.
Sure. And Jerry, I appreciate you mentioning, fear is a sales tactic. And back to my presentation in Dallas, probably why it felt a little bit different is I'm a teacher. I started off, I spent my first 10 years in the classroom. So when I got into sales later in life, I would go listen to sales training that was put on by the company I worked for, and a lot of it was based on, hey, let's scare the crap out of them, let's run the blood pressure up, all that stuff. And I was sitting there in the back of the room going, nope, I'm not going to do that. So I'm especially when it comes to things that folks don't understand. And when you look at cybersecurity, cyber insurance, the development of AI, all of how the ransomware, how these attacks happen. This is stuff that people don't really, the population as a whole doesn't understand. And I think that trying to scare them even more than they probably already are about the subject is a faulty way to go about this. So FifthWall always leads with the education at heart. Try to actually do the exact opposite, which is drive the blood pressure down, make it palatable, understandable. That way people can have actionable things to do to leave from the discussion and go and get better, right? So to your point about the ransomware event, I think what's happened over the last couple of years is a lot of folks nationwide. I know myself when I first started hearing about it back many years ago, you focus on the ransom payment, right? And we particularly, I live in Arkansas. We in the South really, I've heard a lot of business owners kind of take the stance of, oh, we don't negotiate. We're red-blooded Americans. We don't negotiate with terrorists. I'd never pay a ransom. Man, there's so much more to it than that, right? And first of all, I mean, where I would start is look at the compliance standards that have come out over the last 3, 4, 5 years, right? Let's take just car dealerships as an example, right? If you went to a car dealer owner 5 years ago and said, hey, you need to put on MFA and back up daily and train your people against phishing attempts, the car dealer would have told you to pound sand, you were crazy, right? Well, guess what? In 2024, they're under brand new FTC safeguard rules. And if they don't do those things, they could potentially be fined, right? So I think that those standards have brought this stuff more to the forefront. And now what we're looking at is protection of individual data. When that data is compromised, fines and penalties will come from that. People have to be notified. That costs money, right? The fines and penalties that come from those new standards, that costs money, right? The downtime from a first party loss standpoint, if your business can't, think back to staying on car dealerships. Let's go back to CDK Global a couple months ago, right? CDK Global goes down for a little bit. Car dealerships can't sell cars. That's a business impact thing. If I had a lifelong customer that had done business with me and bought multiple cars and they couldn't buy during that time, and they went to a competing car dealer, I may lose that customer moving forward. That's reputational harm, right? There are so many ways. I refer to it a lot of times as the octopus with multiple tentacles, right? Everybody just focuses on that ransomware tentacle, right? But there are so many other tentacles that go out into that loss. And that's why we see numbers like recently, Will and I, we did a hotcakes on this a couple of weeks ago. The average all-in loss for a business 0 to 10 million in revenue as of June 2024 was right around 1.2 million, right? The average ransom payment was cruising in at that same time about 250 to 300K. So that right there tells you there's about an $800 to $900,000 gap between the ransom payment and the all-in cost, which means that we're kind of focusing on the wrong thing, so to speak.
Will, I think you're on mute. I'm not hearing Will. Andy, are you hearing him?
No, I'm not getting him either. He went silent on it.
Will, you may want to drop and rejoin there. While Will's still figuring out his audio issue, you bring up a good point, and I think it's something I like to use the term cost of doing business, right? And
Right.
in this day and age, I feel like attacks are a cost of doing business. Everyone's going to be attacked.
Correct.
There's weird kind of myths and beliefs that go along with it. Like it's almost like getting struck by lightning. If you get struck by lightning once, it can't happen again. Yet you meet people that have been struck 2 and 3 times.
Correct.
There's a lot of people who think that if they are attacked, well, good, I got mine out of the way now. Now the whole industry has to be attacked before it's my turn again, and that's not the case.
Right.
I talked to a lot of folks who, like you said, they'll focus on the ransom payment and say, well, maybe we could negotiate it to 80K for our business or 10K because we can't afford it. But they're forgetting about the fact that you're not working while that's all
Correct.
going on. And one of the pieces I think that a lot of folks never really sit down and talk about and calculate, and this comes through a business impact assessment, a BIA, would be
Right.
how many days or hours can your business be non-functional
Right.
before you have to close the doors?
Yep.
It may be great that you can afford the $80,000 ransom payment or $250,000 ransom payment, but if you're losing $1 million a day, how many days can you sit and afford to do that? And to your point, there's so many folks saying, I will not pay. It really is like that terrorist thing. I will not negotiate with terrorists.
Right. Right.
And I can tell you, I've been to a lot of conferences, one on the federal healthcare system and CMS and HHS, and they brought somebody in and, they polled the audience and said, how many think, what percentage of companies do you think pay ransoms? And after everybody guessed, they said the answer is 100%, at least in all the companies they worked with, because it became a business decision where they realized
Right.
we're losing more money by not being able to work than we are paying it. At that
Right.
point, it's not about whether you negotiate with terrorists. It's about I want to have a business.
Right.
Are you seeing
And that,
similar things?
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, like to the point about not paying the ransom or paying it. I heard a story one time. I was at a conference here in Arkansas. We had a county judge who took that stance. I mean, just the old tough as a boot guy. We never pay a ransom, right? Well, they get hit. I think it was on a Thursday. The guy that was telling the story, we're not going to pay. We're not going to pay. Well, Sunday night rolls around, and the prosecuting attorney for the county calls the county judge up and goes, "Hey, judge, we've got so and so that's going to trial on Tuesday." And it was a pretty nasty criminal, man. I mean, it was a guy that they wanted to nail to the wall, right? I mean, they needed him off the streets. He'd committed a bunch of sexual crimes in the county and things like that. And he was like, all my stuff's on the server. All of my evidence is on the server. They paid the ransom. I mean, and this is a guy who had very publicly said, "I'll never do this." You don't know what the situation is going to. You don't know what the details are going to be, right? So, but from a business continuity standpoint, one of the things that we at FifthWall really try to do that wasn't available for the longest time is we try to help based on claims that have been submitted in folks' sector. Number one, we try to help them understand how is a loss in manufacturing, how's a ransomware event in manufacturing different than an invoice manipulation for a nonprofit, right? Because those are both nefarious actors, bad actors, right? But how does cybercrime differ within different sectors, right? The bad thing about COVID, I talk all the time about the last 5 years, right? Going back to 2019 versus 2024 now. The bad thing about COVID was there was a ton of cybercrime. The good thing about COVID is that there was a ton of cybercrime. And what I mean by that is like statistically, we gained a lot of knowledge on how these guys, operate, the types of losses, the quantity of losses. And now in 2024, we can go back and we can tell a business, hey, in your sector, at your size, with your employees, if you get hit with a ransomware event and you're down for the average amount of time, which is about 15 to 20 days, here's what it's looking like at your size, right? And here's what it has looked like for the 5 years trailing, right? We didn't have that data 5 years ago. So that loss quantification piece is something that, for a CFO or a CEO or somebody who has a healthy stake in the financial, operations of the company, they need to be asking those questions of themselves, of internal IT, of their insurance agent, right? Like how much, I mean, you guys, the Ntiva crew, I mean, we talk about mitigation versus transference all the time. How much do we want to invest to mitigate because we can't fully eliminate? And then what's left over, how much do we need to transfer, over to insurance? And that's a pretty regular conversation with us, especially with larger organizations.
And that's a great segue because one of the things that I was most impressed about when you gave your presentation was obviously the folks in the room had a Q&A session. We could ask whatever we want. You were open and
Right.
transparent about everything.
Right.
And one of the things that hit home for a lot of us was, as an MSP, we're dealing with a lot of clients, and each
Mm-hmm.
client's needs are slightly different, even if they're in the same industry vertical. And
Correct.
we have to work with people who do work with lots of customers in
Right.
lots of different industries so that it's not a one size fits all, right? And one of the
Right.
things that we hear a lot of is that, okay, I know me as a customer, put myself in the customer's shoes now. I might be missing MFA and I might be missing
Mm-hmm.
something like a SIM-SOC solution, but I've got some antivirus.
Right.
And they come to their MSP and they say, I'm doing my annual budgeting. I want to see what these services cost. Maybe they can't afford it, or maybe they're on the fence of how do I show a return on investment?
Yep.
You guys came in and gave a brief and talked about how you can work with the major carriers to say, this company has a policy with you. They're looking to implement MFA. What kind of savings could they get? And
Yep.
it seems like in your examples, there were a lot of cases where, even the insurance company knocking 10 or 20% off of their
Right.
premium was enough that it could have potentially paid for the entire security service. So now they're
Right.
getting a better security posture. they're lowering their risk. The insurance provider is essentially covering the cost of that if, after you move the money around. And I don't know that a lot of them know that that's possible and that it could be that affordable.
Yeah, for sure. And again, going back to 2019, just to kind of set the stage, it hasn't always been this way, right? So like, I mean, like Jerry, when you talk about like your investment in cybersecurity paying off on the insurance end, you rewind 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. This is a brand new thing for business owners and CFOs, right? And when I mean brand new, within the last couple of years. I mean, if you've been doing business since the 90s or 80s, this is something that's come up, in the twilight or the back end of your career. And in 2019, the questions that were being asked by insurance had nothing to do with security posture. It was like, are you in some type of crazy industry, right? Are you in marijuana, gambling, adult content, something like that? And if not, have you had a loss in the last 2 years? And that was pretty much it. I mean, there was no MFA or EDR or IR planning or backups or anything like that. Well, what happened, just to give folks on the call or listening some context, some insurance companies, there were a couple of insurance companies that operated at 114% loss ratio over a 2-year period. And what that means is every time a dollar was paid into insurance, they paid out $1.14 in claims. That's not good. Nobody's going to stay and play that game very long without making some type of adjustment. And what happened out of that was insurance companies went and said, okay, our underwriting practices are horrible. We've got to ask better questions, right? So now in 2024, and we'd really try at FifthWall not to paint with too broad of a brush here, because we can't promise this in every scenario. If you're small revenue, if you've got decent security controls, you're not being heavily underwritten at 1, 2, 3 million in revenue. You get up. I mean, the best example I can give is we worked on an $80 million hospital that wanted their new CFO wanted $5 million of cyber insurance, but they had not invested in MFA and they had not invested in security awareness training. They got one quote back from all of our markets. They got one quote back, and it was $141,000 a year with $100,000 per claim deductible. That was it, right? A year later, with MFA on and security awareness training and an IR plan, we were at $53,000 for the same $5 million in insurance with the $50K deductible per claim. So yes, insurance is now starting to kind of wise up to what a better risk, a good risk looks like, and then also reward companies with reduced premium, reduced deductibles, and expanded coverage.
There is something. Is my mic working now?
Hey,
We
Will.
good?
Hey, there he
Hey.
is. Hey, all right.
I don't know what happened. My audio drivers like completely crashed. It was weird. But anyway, there is something to consider though, because Andy gave a really good example there of, hey, we saved this business, I mean, $90,000 on their insurance policy. I want to just give the caveat that that's not normal. Like that's
Not at
not
all.
the
That's
standard
correct.
yet.
Right.
And this goes back to even the fear-based selling component you were talking about at the beginning there is when you look at cybersecurity, cyber insurance, and incident response all in kind of a tangible, if you were to look like a Venn diagram, right in the middle of that, where they all intersect, my mind would go to what's keeping your business safe, right? It's not so much, oh man, look at all the things that could happen if you don't have insurance or you don't have good cybersecurity or you don't have an incident response plan. The reality is all those things work together to give you a comprehensive ability to remain confident and safe despite all the emerging threats, despite all the chaos that's out there when it comes to cybersecurity. That, to Andy, to your point earlier, a lot of people don't really understand all of the components and complexities of a cyber attack.
Right.
But what they do know is if I have these three components in place, then in the center of that, I can feel safe running my business. I can feel more confident in my business. And those things all work together. I mean, carriers are looking for better security and they're looking for incident response plans that are both in place, understood, and tested. So those things are all playing off of each other. So you may or may not see premium savings. I mean, there's the other side of this where we work with a lot of clients who have a kind of, we call them endorsements or add-on policies on their business owners, and they're not good coverage. So we have to have that kind of conversation with them and say, hey, this is what you're opening yourself up to by carrying a policy like this. I hate to say it, but you're not going to save money going from that to a comprehensive cyber policy. But
Right.
if you have, I would say if you're an optimal risk to our carrier market, so if you have the right controls in place, then the policy you would get that's comprehensive is going to be cheaper than what you would have gotten otherwise, to Andy's point. Like if that business didn't have a comprehensive policy and you go out there and they had good security and they're getting a $50,000 quote, it's like, oh man, that's really expensive. No, well, let me show you what it would have been if you didn't have the
Yep.
security in place.
Yep.
So it's still
Yeah.
playing off of each other. It's just the perception piece of recognizing, hey, all three of those components are vital to creating that safe business posture for you to increase your security and your resilience in the midst of a cyber attack.
And I think prior to working with you guys, I would make these kind of verbal recommendations when I'm sitting in as a vCISO, right? And I
Sure.
would say, hey, we want to go do this project next year. We want to add MFA. We want to add SIMSOC. We want to add vulnerability scanning. But you should, at your next renewal for your insurance policy, should really work with your carrier to find out what kind of savings you could obtain. A lot of them wouldn't tell you in advance, right? To Andy's point, a few years ago, that wasn't a conversation. Now maybe that's changing. But no matter how you do it from a bean counter perspective, you're shelling out for your business, for the cyber insurance, or maybe you can't get cyber insurance because you're too risky or it's too expensive at your current risk level. You're shelling out already for your IT support through an MSP, through your security support. No matter how you play those numbers, if in the end you can increase your security posture without affecting your bottom line potentially, then I think that's a great thing to do and that people should explore it. Regardless of your belief on whether you think you're secure enough or not, why not get more security without shelling out any money? And when I think about the numbers, your example of 150K a year premium, I don't know if that's typical, for a small business, probably
No,
not.
no,
But
it's not.
even if a small business were to go out and get quoted, $25,000 a year, right, for a policy. Um, for $25,000 potentially, or $50,000, whatever that policy was going to cost, you can go put a lot of security in place. And if the provider only knocks off, 10, 15 grand in your whole premium, that's still like $1,000 a month that can go towards security. And you can buy a lot of services and security
Yep.
for $1,000 a month. And I don't know if people are looking at it that way, and they're maybe doing their own organization a disservice by not reaching out and saying, could somebody sit down and talk to me? And look, not everybody, to your point, is going to save those big numbers, but MFA, phishing awareness training, those are low cost solutions.
Yep.
I would find it difficult to believe that an insurance provider wouldn't give you a big enough discount to cover, say, phishing training.
Well,
Right?
I think to that end, right? The way we're thinking about insurance is a little backwards. Not backwards. It's just I'll call it old school, right? You look at people have auto policies. We all have cars, right? And you know that if you get a car and you have to get insurance policy for it, if you can check these extra safety measures boxes, then most carriers out there will discount you, right? So it becomes this competitive game between carriers of who's going to offer the best policy and pricing based off of the discounts because I have daytime running lights, I have airbags and both sides that work. I mean, it's like all these little additional nuances, right? In the cyber insurance space, you do have some carriers who will offer discounts, but Andy brought up something in that story. He said we had one quote, right? We had one quote for that massive company. And this happens a lot. If you don't have good security, then you kind of have access to this baseline minimum of carriers who are going to say, hey, yeah, you know what? We're willing to take you on as a risk, but you're going to pay an arm and a leg for it. And that's kind of how the carrier market's operating right now. As you level up your security, as you get more security in place, you are now unlocking higher tiers of carriers who are going to both offer better coverage and better pricing on that coverage. And I think that's kind of the key component here is rather than saying, hey, that same carrier who I've been using for the past 2 years, 3 years, they better offer me some discounts now. Instead, it's saying, hey, we need to shop this policy out because I've leveled up my security and there's probably better options out there for me. So that's kind of where my mind's going on this. But did we lose Dr. Jerry?
Now Zoom says they're shutting off my video. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Yes,
you.
sir. Yeah, we can hear you. We
Man,
just
Zoom
can't
is
see.
just having a
I,
great
I think
day.
it is a Zoom problem because it was a Zoom message that came up. Um, I'll
No,
play
we got some
around with it
background.
here. What
Yeah.
that looks like just my background, but yeah, definitely a Zoom problem today. Great points. Let me segue into something else because I know folks are going to probably want to hear about this. In 2024, there were some trends or some changes that you guys were seeing as far as
Mhm.
what carriers were wanting to see as minimum security items. And as we're going into 2025, can you guys speak to what you think's coming, what they're kind of telling you that where, the minimum each year is not the same, right? They will not accept the
Right.
same posture year over year. Uh, can you speak to any of that for the folks?
No, it's a great point. And I mean, going back to what I said earlier about where we were at in 2019 versus where we're at in 2024, I mean, there were very, very little cybersecurity underwriting practices going on in 2019, 2020 pre-pandemic. Where we saw that start was with multi-factor authentication, firewalls, backups, patching, stuff like that. And those are still considered to be the basics, right? What we've started seeing over the last year is EDR has entered over the last, I'd say, year to 18 months. We've seen endpoint detection enter the chat. And really where that comes in is less of a, hey, you got to have it to get a policy, but more of a, okay, you've got a million. I mean, Jerry, think back to that risk quantification conversation we had earlier. I worked a manufacturer back in the spring that had a $2 million policy, but they had a huge revenue bump since they had started that policy, right? Like they had almost like doubled in revenue. So their CFO was looking at that policy going, hey, this is inadequate now. We really need 5 million. Well, the carrier comes back and says, hey, we'll go to 5, but before we go to 5, we need to know that you have EDR on every endpoint out there, right? So we're starting to see EDR become more of a requirement, particularly for higher limits. We're starting to see security awareness training, and I want to kind of pause on that for just a second, right? Security awareness training with phishing simulation, right? When I'm walking through and I'm doing my training with MSPs, I advise MSPs across the country every day of the week. I joke all the time and I say, look, like the CEO showing a 5-minute video at the yearly Christmas party while everybody's whiskey drunk, that doesn't count anymore, right? Like you've got to have ongoing monthly security awareness training with phishing simulation. And where that's tying in right now is there are, without really going too far into the cyber insurance weeds, you've got third party, you've got first party coverage, and you've got cyber crime coverage. What we're starting to see some carriers do is if you're not offering security awareness training with phishing simulation, if you don't have policies and procedures in place for large wire transfers around that, they're going to sublimit or eliminate that cybercrime coverage. Like they'll take it off of a policy totally, or instead of giving you the normal 250K that you should have, they're going to knock it down to 50,000 or 10,000, right? And essentially they're saying, until you start training your people, until you put policies and procedures in place that make you a better risk, we're not going to insure you to the full limit, right? As far as where the ball is going, or we talk all the time about where the Frisbee is now versus where the Frisbee's headed, right? I think that where we're seeing it currently from underwriters is that EDR is progressing to MDR, SOC 24/7 monitoring, right? I mean, they want to know that somebody kind of has, eyes on the glass 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for larger risks. So we are starting to see that more. And then privilege access management, that nobody was talking about PAM 3-4 years ago on the insurance side. And, the hospital that I mentioned earlier, part of their benchmark moving forward was, hey, we'll get you at 5 million this year. But in order to keep that moving forward, we're probably going to have to see privilege access management.
Before you go on there, Andy, let's just think of it
yeah.
from a logical standpoint for a minute. The way that carriers are building out these requirements, it's not just willy-nilly, oh, there's another thing that they're requiring of me.
Right.
Over time, the way that carriers understand risk is by looking back on past claims.
Right.
So what they're saying is they look at this stuff and they say, wait a minute. These people who had endpoint detection, who had the ability to know if something got on the network, saw fewer claims and more importantly saw less payout on those claims because they were
Right.
able to shut down the point at which the bad actor gained entry. Right now, MDR comes into the picture. MDR, just for anyone listening who doesn't really understand, you have EDR, which is kind of like having a security system on your house that you installed yourself and it runs an alarm. Maybe it sets off an alarm when something bad happens. MDR is kind of like now you have that security company monitoring your home. So when that alarm gets tripped, they're calling, they're checking it in, they're shutting down the endpoint. It's the same with your network. So 24/7 managed detection is that detection is not just going out and being a note, but it's someone saying, oh, something's wrong here. We're shutting down that endpoint and you can't access the internet till we figure out what's going on. Like it's that kind of mindset. So when you think from a logical perspective, PAM solutions, privileged access management, is effectively saying, hey, not every person and their mother is allowed to have administrative rights on this computer, because everyone who has administrative rights adds an additional potential risk that something bad could happen, because they're not just accessing their local machine, they have the ability to touch every computer on the network. This is bad. The same goes for, I mean, there's other things that are coming into play. Secure email gateways are coming up now too. And that's just, I mean, having an additional layer before that email hits your inbox. Like these are all things that when you look at it from a logical standpoint, this is going to reduce the chances that something bad will happen. And that's ultimately what insurance is. It's organized gambling. So how are we going to reduce the potential for a cyber attack without eliminating it completely? Right? If they wanted to eliminate it completely, they would say you can't get a cyber policy unless you don't have internet access, which doesn't make any sense. Right? And that's kind of the reality of the situation we're seeing. So they're starting to add more of these security measures, but from a security standpoint, as your business is growing, you're saying, hey, wait, I want to continue to adapt and grow to meet the ever growing and adapting potential threats that are out there. I mean, just because you have security in place today doesn't mean next year you're still secure, because I mean, look at AI. AI's blown up over the past year. You used to get a phishing email with really broken English. Now a phishing, a criminal can literally go in and say, hey, ChatGPT, write me an email, and then they can fill in the blanks later, but it's way less broken English. It looks way more legitimate now because they don't have to use Google Translate to write these emails. And so the reality is we're seeing advancements in the threats, so we need to advance our security to protect it, and insurance is kind of leading the charge there of saying, hey, what's kind of the next step?
And I like
And
the
one,
fact that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Andy.
oh no, I was just saying well, like my soapbox issue for 2024. I mean, because everything we've talked about to this point has been left the boom controls to try to keep the bad guys from getting in. Um, and a little bit of a spicy take here for me, but I don't mind saying it. And hopefully maybe somebody on the insurance side of things will hear me and adjust. But Will's heard me say this over and over again. I think that incident response planning is massively undervalued by insurance carriers right now. And for those of you listening, we're not a carrier, we're a wholesale broker. We deal with 45 carriers. I see pretty large entities come through us where all that's asked of their insurance or of their incident response plan is, do you have one? Yes or no. And if it's a no, it doesn't keep them from getting insurance. It doesn't really drive premium a lot. And to me, yes, I mean, like to Will's point, we've learned what a good risk looks like, right? And we've looked at those claims and we said, here are the stuff that you have in place left the boom to keep the bad guys out, and that's what keeps claims from happening. Well, my tip to that, Tad, is like, okay, when it does happen, right? Why are we not rewarding companies for having customized, offline, regularly updated, yearly tabletop response plans? Because in my mind, as a former and current coach, if I've got a plan and the other guy doesn't, I'm in a better space than the other guy is when the stuff hits the fan, right? So I would really like to see insurance companies as a whole, if if you've worked with your MSP, like let's say that they've come to you and Ntiva and said, hey, like we really want to dig in and get a customized incident response plan. We're going to tie our insurance to it. We're going to give you guys a copy of the policy so you know who to contact and how to help us in the event that something does happen. And then we're going to make sure that the emails, the cell phone numbers that are on this thing are updated biannually. And once a year, we're going to go in with all our staff and we're going to tabletop a ransomware event to make sure we know. Like that's how you keep a $2 million event, going back to loss quantification, right? And what we were talking about before. That's how you keep a $2 million event from happening. It doesn't drag out over 30 days. Now it drags out over 3 days. Guess what? We lost 27 less days of business income. That is far less financially impactful to the organization. So, you can tell kind of because like my heartbeat's going and my voice is going up, but like
And you're getting
super
a little
passionate
sweaty
about.
there.
Yeah, getting a little sweaty. I mean, like I really would like to see insurance companies, especially. I mean, Will just mentioned Chat GPT. I get it 5 years ago if you didn't want to have somebody submit their 40-page incident response plan and read through it. But guess what? we can do that now a lot more efficiently than we could 5 years ago. So I'd like to see insurance companies start giving more value to our plan.
I'd like to see that as well. I'd like to see, I think insurance companies, at least in the cyber realm, maybe are moving a little bit into a better direction than,
Yeah.
like Will said, when you think of insurance, you think of probably car insurance, homeowners insurance, and
Right.
it's this hole that you just dump money into year after year, and you hope
Right.
you never have anything bad, and then if you do, you hope that they'll pay. Cyber insurance, I hope, could be looked at a little bit differently, and I feel where cyber insurance providers have a real place they could help out our clients is one, like you said, in offering rewards and rewarding
Right.
people for good behavior, but also kind of being a supplement to compliance. Like
Yep.
up till now, I feel like the majority of the companies who shell out for the best security posture do it primarily because it's a compliance requirement. You know, you can go into any hospital or doctor's office in America, and everyone there knows what HIPAA is. You can go into DoD and understand what classified and unclassified information is and things like that. They're heavily regulated, and therefore they have usually decent security postures. We all know there's ways around it, but it was compliance driving this. If you want to be in this space, here's your barrier to entry. Overcome it, and you can play in our space. Insurance, I think, has a great opportunity to come in here and say, you probably don't realize that so many of you are regulated, and you just never knew it. But outside of that, here's what you should be doing, and here's how we can help, and here's how we can reward you. And you're right, I don't see that happening much today. I kind of feel like most people, myself included, until I met you all, looked at cyber insurance as just another thing like auto insurance.
Right.
And one of the things I want to make sure we covered before we wrapped it up today was, by the time that this airs, since this is pre-recorded, I'm hoping that we've, got all of our paperwork, T's crossed, I's dotted, and Fifth Wall will be a Ntiva partner to support our clients. But one of the things I wanted to make sure you guys had an opportunity to cover was, once this partnership is fully established and we can get our clients in front of you, whether they have a policy through someone today, whether they're shopping for a policy, whether they're looking for someone to review their policy to see did their provider actually give them adequate coverage, not just what was best for the provider, maybe gotchas in their claims. Can you guys talk about what your company does as far as those services and how you can help our client base?
Absolutely. First of all, and part of our getting the T's crossed and the I's dotted is we're bringing in additional account managers and getting one of those account managers solely dedicated to the Ntiva team, right? To where you guys have a dedicated account manager from Fifth Wall. When they engage with our team, first of all, I strongly believe that currently cyber insurance takes the average business, I'd say, to the proctologist before they go to the general practitioner. And what I mean by that is they go to their local agent and they say, hey, we need a cyber policy because we're required by this contract. And the agent goes, great, fill out this 12-page app. And the client looks at it and goes, I don't know what EDR is. What is MFA? What's an IR plan, right? The way Fifth Wall starts from the beginning is we set up with that account manager, that cyber insurance specialist, a 30-minute consultation to meet that client where they're at, right? If they're coming to us going, we've never had cyber insurance before, and this contract says we have to have it. That's a different conversation than here's your quote, do you want it, right? Like you need to explain to them what cyber insurance does, right? Like what does it cover? How does it work? What's a per claim deductible, right? That's a huge thing, right? Because you could have 5 or 6 claims in a single event. If a client's coming to us and they say, hey, our local guy got us a policy, it's been in place for 4 or 5 years, the premium has been going up and up and up, and there's been no explanation. And when we ask questions, we get sent to a 1-800 number. That's a different conversation, right? So what we do is we try to meet our clients, where they're at, and really try to walk them through whatever it is that they need. If it's base level understanding about cyber insurance so they can get their first policy, we'll meet them there. If it's having third eyes on a policy that's already established and gap analyzing that and comparing it to their controls, we can meet them there. The biggest thing that I, with my account managers, encourage them to, and our policy specialists every time that we meet, is really paint the picture, lead with education. Start with what's going on in that sector. Help them understand what their loss potential is. Don't sell with fear, but help them understand, like we said before, how a manufacturer is different than a nonprofit, right? Then let's loss quantify, right? Like, let's get that piece on there where they understand based on their revenue and the records that they have and the sector that they're in, get them an idea of about how much insurance they need to buy. We're not going to tell you, we're not going to force it. We can't create your loss. You know, we can't create your risk tolerance for you, but give them a general idea, and then get into the weeds of, okay, what does the policy say? How do your controls relate to that? And then finish with pricing and show them very, very clearly, nothing hidden, for your size and your sector. What is an average cyber insurance premium? What's high? What's low? How do we get from high to low? Well, maybe we need to go put on MFA. Maybe we need to do EDR this year. Maybe we need to do a security awareness training program, right? And if we can walk them down that path of what's going on in your sector, what does your loss look like? Where are the gaps in your policies and your controls? And how do they affect your premium? Whether or not people do business with us or not, they walk away feeling a heck of a lot more.
And Will, let me ask you a question to tie into what Andy just said. So let's talk. Let's say someone watches this and they go, you know, this sounds fantastic. Maybe whether they have insurance, don't have insurance, and they go, I really need help. I'm new to the game too, right? And Ntiva works with a lot of clients, but our primary contacts at our clients could range anything from executive assistant, project manager, the most technical techie in the company, a C-suite individual, right? We don't know who's representing each company until we sit down with that company. If someone did want to sit down with Fifth Wall, can you recommend the types of maybe documentation or information they should expect to bring to the table to make that conversation easier? And who should be in that meeting? So if it is a project manager, but you know you need the CFO, for example, can you recommend who should be there so that you have the right audience? And
Yeah, it's a
that way
great
you can ask the
question.
right questions and they can ask the right questions?
That's awesome question. Yeah, so Andy kind of hinted at it before, but if you currently have a cyber insurance policy, bring that. I mean, we want to be able to go through that, right? We also need to know what security controls you have in place, so that's where Ntiva gets involved. So we need Ntiva on that meeting as well. So that's something when before we get into like who to bring from your company, where really the largest component here is we want to come in as an associate to Ntiva so that what we're doing is making the entirety of your cybersecurity experience, from cybersecurity to incident response to insurance, kind of seamless and a lot more digestible and easy to understand. We want to make it tangible. We don't want it to just be this laundry list of things that you need to do. And the other component of that is a lot of insurance sales is, hey, here's your policy, okay, great, talk to you next year. And our what we want to do is we want to make sure that you leave that conversation feeling confident, that you know how to engage that insurance, you know what's going on, you know what you're covered for. We want to make sure you understand how to best navigate an incident when that happens with the insurance component, because that is something that's confusing. So that involves a couple of different players, right? So if you're a larger company and you have C-suite executives, we want someone like the CFO in on that meeting, because ultimately they're going to be making the decisions both from a cyber insurance perspective, but also from a cybersecurity perspective. If Andy comes in or another account manager at Fifth Wall comes in and they say, hey, you know what, you're going to need to explore some of these additional security measures, but we're talking to the IT guy at the company, that's great. The IT guy's like, oh yeah, I've been talking about this for months now. That's awesome that you guys are saying that. It's like, okay, but you can't implement that, can you? Like, no, we got to talk to the CFO. It's like, well, that'd been great if they were on that meeting to begin with. So CFO obviously is a really important person to have on that meeting. But if it's a smaller business where you don't really have the CFO, we want the business owner in on that meeting who's making those decisions on the insurance component. One, because yes, they make the decisions on if they're going to get a policy or if they want to explore options for a policy. But also, when we were talking about security awareness training before, usually the biggest culprits of falling into cyber attacks is your C-suite executives or your business owners, because they're the ones who are being targeted. At the reality, they have a lot more access to things than, Carla, who's been working on the uh, the administrative side for 30 years and just, does a couple of small Excel sheet tasks. Like, it's very different. So we want someone to come in who's going to actually be able to take that information. And I mean, one other component to that, and what I want to say is when fifth wall comes in on a conversation, we want to help equip the client with the ability to better better navigate, like I said, but also, hey, how am I going to make this a lot faster? So we were talking about security controls that carriers are requiring and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when we sit down with Ntiva and one of Ntiva's clients, the questions are not just going to be what's going to save you money. The questions are going to be what can you be doing to navigate the whole from getting your security in place to navigating that incident at the end. What are the things you can be doing to set yourself up for success? Our boss likes to say, help your future self, right? So what are you going to do to help your future self should an incident happen so that you're not scrambling to figure out what to do? And that's where all these components come into play. And that's why we need the business owner, the CFO, the CEO. Honestly, the decision makers being on that call can be really helpful.
And Andy, one last question for you to tie into that.
Mhm.
Whether a client has insurance already and a renewal's coming up, or they're shopping for insurance, or they've been denied insurance, whatever the case may be, how far in advance do you think they should be reaching out to their Ntiva account manager so that we can put them in contact with you? We can gather the information around what services are being provided today. How much of a lead time do you think you'd like?
I know this is going to sound crazy, but I would say 3 months or, a quarter if we're talking in business terms. And the reason is, I mean, let's go back to that underwriting thing, right? We've established the fact that carriers are asking for more and more and more, right? And I mentioned a manufacturer that was required to have EDR to get the 5 million in coverage, right? In that particular instance, they already had it on because we've been working with their MSP for 2 years and we'd set that roadmap well in advance, right? But let's say they didn't have EDR, right? Going to getting a quote from Ntiva, taking that to the board, discussing it at the next, board meeting, which is going to come up in time, right? Getting it approved, actually getting it put on, right? Being able to attest, yes, that it's on every single endpoint, right? That could take months. I mean, we've had clients that didn't have MFA and they knew that it was stinging them on premium, but because they had 200, 300 endpoints, it took 45 to 50 days to get them to the point to where they could attest that yes, MFA was fully implemented, right? So when we get past the whole here's a quote, do you want it, sign off and we're good, which is not at all what we want to do. When you start bringing in CFOs and you start talking about additional cybersecurity measures and you talk about, like Will said, not just where's the Frisbee at today, but help your future self, where's the Frisbee going? Those are consultative conversations that take time. So if your insurance, let's say your insurance renews on January the 1st, right? A lot of insurance renews on 1/1. We really would like to have that initial conversation at the end of September or the beginning of October. That would be ideal.
I think that's reasonable. In my head, I was honestly thinking 90 days as well for many of the similar reasons. I would even say at some cases it could be further out. And
Correct.
quantify that, what I mean by that is their fiscal cycle. If they
Yep.
know that they don't have, like if they're listening today and they come back and they say, well, I have EDR and our EDR is an MDR platform, it does have a 24/7 SOC, check the box. But maybe they've been quoted phishing training and haven't signed up. Maybe they've been quoted MFA and haven't signed up, but they know what their fiscal cycle is, and it may not align with when their cyber insurance contract renews. It would be good to know that in advance. How do we
Yeah.
budget? You don't want to go through your annual budget, not put these things in because you already have insurance and you're planning to renew, and then come to
Right.
find out I needed to drop $20,000 in there, and I didn't plan for it. So to me, I think, and this is a responsibility on the Ntiva side as well, our account managers, our VCISOs, our VCIOs, our IT advisors, they need to be asking those same things. When does it come up for renewal? When is your fiscal cycle? And let's plan this in advance. And maybe they need to have an introductory call with you 6 to 9 months out.
Yeah.
But it's just a level set of how things are going to work. What's the timing? And then maybe you don't talk for 3 months. But when we come back the second time, we've got all our ducks in a row, our documentation's ready.
Yeah.
Um, and I think as
And
we partner, we're going to come up with a nice kind of flow of
right.
what questions need to be answered. We can have all this prep so that we're not impacting our customers with a big questionnaire that they're like, come on, I pay Antiva for this. You guys should be able to answer this.
Right. And that's, I mean, and listen, I'm going to caveat this with there are good agents out there that plan ahead, that don't procrastinate and know cyber well. But what we hear from our MSP partners across the country in all 50 states is, left to the timeline of the local agent, they are seeing over and over and over again, here comes the 10-page app and it's 2 weeks from renewal, 3 weeks from renewal, right? I mean, think about having that insurance renewal come up on 1/1 and getting a 10-page app on December the 10th with the holidays in front of it. You know, we hear stories like that regularly, almost daily, right? So my encouragement, I mean, stepping out to Ntiva and to their clients is like, whoever you're talking to, whether it's a VCISO or an account manager or whatever, like put some flags in the ground, right? Of here's where we want to finish up. Okay, well, here's the first marker. Let's back it out here, you know, and set, you know, some project management goals around this stuff that give you the opportunity to do the things that need to be done to manage and mitigate the risk.
I know we don't have a lot of time, so I just want to I want to hit one pain point on all of this is, you know, Andy brought up MSPs getting these forms. Think of it from your perspective as a business owner. So like if an Ntiva end client's listening into this, think of this as from that mindset, right? You get this insurance application or renewal application 10 days before that policy is set to renew. You look at it, you're like, I don't know what any of these security controls mean. So you send it over to Ntiva. And Tiva says, well, we can't just do this right away. We have some stuff we have to do. And you're like, oh, well, my policy renews in 10 days. I need it. It's like, all right, well, we may have to charge extra for a emergency situation. Hey, we have to get this done now. I mean, we have to totally change up our calendar because of it. So you start to run into roadblocks. Then they get that form back to you. You send it over to your agent. Your agent sends it to the carrier. The carrier is already bogged down with underwriting, especially if we're looking at the 1/1 date where Andy said the majority of policies are renewing 1/1. So your carrier's already bogged down, so they don't get you those renewal terms until 2 days before renewal. But there's a caveat on those renewal terms. Hey, you need to install multi managed detection and response on all of your endpoints. So you go back to Ntiva, say, oh, they say we need MDR. And Ntiva says, well, that's really hard to do in 48 hours. So we're going to have to do that, but we're also going to have to charge you for emergency services to get that put in place faster and sooner than it would normally take. So everybody's scrambling. You're probably paying more for that security control than you would have if you had actually taken the runway. And everybody's stressed because if this doesn't get done in 48 hours, that policy is going to lapse. This is what we want to avoid with FifthWalls. We want to work with Ntiva to say, hey, let's get in there. Let's make sure we know the dates. Let's make sure we have the conversations so that you have a runway and a path to follow to be secure and to be an optimal risk to the carriers by the time that renewal comes up.
That's a great point to kind of end on, and I would add to that and say your scenario is 100% accurate in a lot of cases, most cases. I would even say that there are services, especially when you're talking 24/7, that are a third party partner, that even if Ntiva said, I'm willing to work New Year's Eve to get this in place, well, the partner may not be. They don't
Right.
necessarily turn a quote around in 24 hours. They don't mail out an appliance in 24. Like there's a lot of other components to it that just keep adding to that lead time that if you're not aware of it and you're not accounting for it, you're going to be in a bind.
Yep.
And one final comment I'd make is I did not want to go into detail here on this. I didn't want to badmouth anyone, but every insurance uh, agent is not the same from a knowledge perspective, how much care they're willing to put in. And we all know that different policies take a different amount of time to work. They pay differently from a commission standpoint. Flat out, you might not be getting the right policy, and it's just someone needed to get something off their plate. And I think having you guys take the time to look at it and go, even if they don't do business with FifthWall long term, you looked at it and go, your agent sold you the right insurance, or hey, I can't beat their price. Nothing like putting a second set of eyes on that. You guys are trained professionals in that. You're not making anyone commit to anything up front. Um, I'm really looking forward to the partnership and what you guys are going to bring to the table. Before we close, any last comments that you guys want to state? I can't thank you enough for being here.
No, I just thank you for having us on. And I mean, to that last point, we are specialists. We don't offer any other lines of insurance. So to your exact point, having worked as a generalist insurance agent in my history, you do get faced with decisions where it's like, okay, this cyber thing is really bugging me right now, and there's questions around it, but I've got this $80,000 policy that puts more food on my table over here that needs to get more attention from me, right? That doesn't exist at FifthWall. We don't do work comp, we don't do business owners policies or business auto. You know that if Ntiva and your clients work with us, cyber is what we do. It gets 100% of our full attention, regardless if it's a $2,000 policy for a mom and pop shop, or if it's a $100,000 E&O for a large MSP. It gets 100% of our attention. Will, anything that you want to toss on top of that?
No, that was awesome. Dr. Jerry, thanks for having us on, man.
Thank you both. Hey, I'm looking forward to this going live and our clients being able to hear this and learn, if nothing else, learn a lot from you guys, because you pass a lot of information. Like you said, you're educators. I am as well. I love educating folks. And I look forward to them coming back with questions and maybe having you back on at a later date to answer some general questions that will help, really help the entire client base. So thank you for making time out of your busy schedule. Appreciate everything that you passed. Gentlemen, have a great afternoon.
Hey, you too.
Good.
Thank you.